The surprise in the glass of water that didn't respond. I still remember that noon in Ohio so clearly, in a small dining room filled with sunlight. Mr. Henry, 74 years old, had just finished a meal of roast chicken and potatoes when he suddenly froze. He reached for the edge of the table, sat motionless for a few seconds, then fell backward like a door flung open. His wife screamed. His son rushed over, thinking he had just experienced a drop in blood pressure. His pulse was still beating, his eyes still open, but he said nothing, just stared blankly at a spot on the ceiling. I was called in not long after that. The tests ruled out a stroke, and his blood pressure was within a safe range. No heart damage. No adverse reaction to medication. So what exactly had happened? I looked around the dining table. The glass of water was still full, completely untouched. His hand was still trembling slightly, with the thumb resting loosely on the edge of the plate. And I realized, he had entered the meal without drinking a single drop of water. A small deviation, but for a 74-year-old with a history of narrowed brain vessels, it was the beginning of a silent dehydration episode. You might be thinking, it's just skipping a glass of water, how serious could that be? But that very thing is what haunted me the most for years as a brain specialist. Because what happened next will make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about something as simple as a glass of water. Just one glass of water before each meal and a forgotten part of the brain. When I returned to Mr. Henry's dining table, the glass of water was still full. It stood there clear, motionless, as if the whole family had forgotten it was even there. It wasn't a small detail. For young people, maybe it doesn't matter. But for someone over 60, especially those already showing signs of narrowed brain vessels, then every missed glass of water before a meal is another moment the brain is silently left behind. I often compare the brain to a patch of soil. When that soil is dry, no matter how many seeds you plant, they won't grow. In the same way, if the brain isn't watered at the right time, even the best nutrition and medication will struggle to reach the places they're needed. Nutrients need blood. Blood requires water to move freely. Without water, blood becomes thick like a river choked with mud, making it harder to reach the tiniest capillaries that nourish the brain. Older adults often don't feel thirsty, but that doesn't mean their bodies have enough water. The thirst signal weakens with age, leading many to think they're fine while the brain is quietly calling for help. Have you noticed? Many seniors eat just fine, but feel tired, drowsy, or a bit confused afterward. Sometimes all they're missing is one glass of water. No noise. No dramatic signs. The brain's drying out always begins quietly from a forgotten glass of water. And if we keep ignoring it, then tomorrow might be a moment like Mr. Henry's, only this time, you won't have the chance to get back up because after every meal, your brain is being starved without you knowing it. I know this might sound strange. But every time you sit down for a meal, especially a big one, there's one part of your body that's forced to step aside. And sadly, that part is your brain. Have you noticed? After lunch, many older adults feel more tired than energized. Some feel suddenly sleepy. Some get confused, disoriented for a few minutes. They didn't eat the wrong food. It's just the blood flow went somewhere else. After a meal, your body redirects blood to support digestion. It's a completely natural response. The problem is, if your blood is too thick, or your brain vessels are already narrowed, the areas responsible for memory, alertness, and balance are temporarily starved. And just like a child who isn't fed on time, the brain reacts by going quiet. It doesn't scream. It simply makes you feel foggy, sluggish, and heavy-headed. But if this happens every day, 2 or 3 times over time, that part of the brain doesn't just doze off. It starts to fade into the background. For younger people, this adjustment is temporary and easily recovered. But for older adults, especially those at risk of narrowed brain vessels, this is the very first threshold of cognitive decline, balance issues, and silent strokes. I used to think, what harm can a meal possibly do? Until I saw hundreds of my patients grow a little quieter after every single meal. And the most surprising part is if there had just been water in the bloodstream before the meal, everything might have been completely different. Watered brain or withering brain? The answer lies in that glass of water. Imagine the brain as a garden. Each neuron is a branch, a tiny sprout that needs steady nourishment. And blood is the stream that waters this garden, carrying oxygen, glucose, and essential nutrients so the brain can function, memory can hold, and mood can stay balanced. But what happens if you begin a meal without a warm glass of water already in your system? The blood thickens like watered glue. It can't reach the tiny capillaries feeding the hippocampus, where memory is stored and emotions are balanced. It's also too heavy to flow through the small arteries behind the forehead, the area controlling focus and spatial navigation. And when those neural branches don't get watered, they start to dry out. Not physically dry, but functionally dry. Signals slow down, connections between neurons loosen, and you find yourself blanking out after each meal. This doesn't happen in a day. It happens quietly, over and over again. And that's why I call it a silent withering. But you know what? One glass of water, just a small 150 milliliters cup, if timed right, can make a huge difference. It thins the blood just enough, making the flow more flexible. It gently opens the capillaries like early rain softening dry soil. And it gives your brain a chance to come alive again, even if just 15 minutes after a meal. It's not about how much water you drink. It's about whether you drank it at the right time. Dry brain signals are often mistaken for aging. When Mr. Henry sat in the clinic, his wife gently held my hand and whispered, "Maybe he's just getting old, doctor. After meals he gets a little spaced out, forgets the grandkids' names. I guess that's normal." I paused for a few seconds. Then softly replied, "Not necessarily, ma'am. Maybe his brain is just dry." We often label every sign of post-meal fatigue, mild confusion, or momentary disorientation as part of aging. And yes, age does play a role. But it's not the only cause. There's something even more silent, happening every day, that we often overlook: mild dehydration of the brain, especially after each meal. Have you ever seen your loved one suddenly go quiet after eating, no longer joining the conversation? Mix up the grandkids' names or ask the same thing twice within 5 minutes. Walk to the kitchen for something, then freeze, forgetting what they were about to do. We call that age-related brain fog. But I call it the first signal of a brain that needs watering. Remember this: the brain has no water reservoir. It runs on steady streams of blood rich in oxygen. And if blood reaches it slowly due to thick blood, narrowed vessels, or simply not drinking water, each functional area starts to lose performance. Like a radio with a faint signal. Still playing, but the sound is fuzzy. Still there, but not as clear as it used to be. And the saddest part is, we accept it as just part of getting old, instead of asking a simple question: have I had enough water at the right time today? Let me tell you about 14 days and a brighter memory from One Small Habit by Mrs. Ellen. I once cared for a patient named Mrs. Ellen, who lived in Fresno, California. She was 76, long retired, living with her youngest daughter. Her daughter came to me with quiet concern: "Mom's still healthy, still cooks for herself, but lately she keeps repeating the same questions. Sometimes, right after we've just talked, she'll ask the same. It's not too serious yet, but I'm scared." I met Mrs. Ellen one late afternoon. She smiled gently, intelligent and witty, but in her words, there was a faint blank space. When I asked about that morning, she could recall the meal. Then grew confused when I asked what color dress her daughter had worn. I saw it, but somehow forgot, she mumbled, then turned to me. You can probably guess, doctor. Just old age, right? I didn't rush to any conclusion. I simply asked one gentle question: when do you usually drink water during the day? She smiled. Oh, I drink plenty. Every time I feel thirsty, I drink a full glass. And that was the starting point. I simply asked her daughter to remind her to drink one warm glass of water about 150 milliliters 30 minutes before each meal. No change in medication. No brain supplements. No memory exercises. Just one single thing: drink water at the right time. 14 days later, I received a message from her daughter: Doctor, my mom doesn't repeat questions anymore. This morning, she even told me my shirt wasn't ironed properly. I never imagined. Just one glass of water could make such a difference. That was when I knew, memory doesn't just need vitamins or brain games. It needs to be watered. Like a garden, it needs moisture, blood flow, and steady circulation to bloom. And sometimes, for memory to shine again, you don't need to do anything big. Just start with one small habit. Repeated the right way, at the right time, with enough consistency. When you drink at the wrong time, water still goes in, but the brain stays hungry. Drinking water at the wrong time can throw a lifetime off course. Have you ever heard this saying? Drinking water is good, just drink plenty of it. But I have to say this, honestly, it's not always true. Water is only good when it's drunk at the right time. If you drink it at the wrong time, it not only fails to help, but can even push the brain into a state of silent loss of control after each meal. Many of my patients say, I do drink water regularly, doctor. When I ask, before or after meals? They say, after eating, or whenever I feel thirsty. That ends, which sounds harmless, is part of the reason why so many people over 60 end up feeling foggy, tired, confused. And no one knows why. Did you know? Drinking water right after eating forces the stomach to expand suddenly, disrupting digestion rhythms. Even more, blood is already rushing to the intestines. If you add water, the body has to redirect blood flow, causing a sudden drop in the supply to the brain. The brain doesn't like sudden shifts like that. It needs stability, consistency, and especially at an older age. And if you only drink when you're thirsty, you're already too late. Because by the time your body feels thirst, you've lost at least 1 to 2% of your total water, and your brain had already been affected 30 minutes earlier. I have a patient named Mr. Luis from Arizona. He said, I don't drink water before meals, I don't want to wake up to pee at night. But after a few months, he started losing balance in the afternoons, felt foggy after dinner. It wasn't illness. It was mistimed water repeated long enough, and damage quietly began. You see, a small habit done wrong stretched over time is no longer a small thing. Because each day that passes, your brain is either being nourished, or quietly drying out. And sometimes, all it takes is one mistimed sip to lose an entire string of clear days. If you're on medication, eat salty foods, or stay inactive. Don't skip this. Among the hundreds of patients I've seen, there's one group I always pay special attention to. Not because they have obvious symptoms, but because they're at the highest risk of silent brain vessel damage if they don't keep the right water drinking habits. And you might be in that group. If you fall into any of these cases, you're taking blood pressure meds, diuretics, or diabetes medication. These drugs alter electrolytes in the blood, causing mild, constant dehydration that you can't feel in time. You eat salty foods, processed meals, or often use soy sauce or fish sauce. High salt levels trap water in tissues, blood becomes thicker, and it flows to the brain more slowly. You're physically inactive, and you stay indoors most of the day. Lack of movement causes blood to stagnate, reduces brain circulation, and most of all, makes you forget to drink water. The brain doesn't wait for you to drink when you feel tired. It needs to be watered gently, consistently, before moments when it demands more water, like at mealtime. If you fall into one or more of the groups above, then that pre-meal glass of water is no longer a recommendation. It's a protective shield. Just like you wouldn't go out in the sun without a hat, you shouldn't go into a meal without that glass of water. Because for your body, and especially your increasingly sensitive brain, even the smallest act of forgetfulness could lead to a numb, foggy day, a confused afternoon, or one unexpected fall. You can turn a glass of water into a brain-saving habit with just 3 simple steps. We all know, understanding something is one thing, but doing it consistently is another. Many of my patients nod enthusiastically after hearing this advice, promising for sure. But 3 days later, things go right back to the way they were. Because in truth, age-related memory isn't your enemy, scattered habits are. If you've ever forgotten to drink water before a meal, it's not because you lack willpower, but because you haven't built a habit system that's light enough, easy enough, and fits smoothly into your daily rhythm. So today, I won't give generic advice. Instead, try these 3 small steps like building a bridge between your dining table and your brain. Step 1, place the glass of water where you'll see it first before the meal. Don't leave the glass in a corner or the kitchen. Put it next to your spoon or napkin where your eyes will naturally land. Your brain needs a visual cue to trigger the action. Step 2, stick to a gentle volume, 150 milliliters of warm water, not too much to feel full, not too little to be careless. Warm water helps the stomach receive it better, without constricting blood vessels. And most importantly, just be consistent, don't try to overdo it. Step 3, pair drinking water with an existing habit. For example, each time you open the fridge to prep a meal, take 1 sip first. Or, when turning on the kitchen light in the morning, place the glass right away. The brain loves habit pairs, they help you keep going without needing to remember. After a few days of practice, you'll feel the magic. You won't forget to drink water, because it's now woven into your daily rhythm. And each drop of water, gentle like early spring rain, will soak into every corner of your brain, responsible for memory, balance, and alertness. You don't need to try harder. You just need to place a bridge and let the feet of habit carry you across, day by day. When the brain softens, you'll feel clarity return. I always feel moved when a patient returns to my clinic, not to complain about anything, but simply to say one gentle sentence: "Doctor, my head feels lighter now." Mrs. Ellen is one example. After 3 weeks of drinking water before meals, not only was her memory better, but she told me, "It's strange, doctor. In the afternoons, I no longer feel that drop like before. It's like something in my head softened." I know exactly what that feeling is. Because the brain's frontal region, which controls alertness, emotion, and reasoning, it's like a patch of high soil in a garden. Without enough water, it becomes hard and cracks easily. But when evenly watered, it turns elastic, flexible, and alive. That feeling of softening is actually micro-recovery. It means blood is finally reaching the tiny capillaries, bringing oxygen to the right places, and giving the brain long used to exhaustion a chance to light up again. Many older adults tell me, "It feels like I just stepped out of a fog." Or, "I don't get irritated for no reason in the late afternoon anymore." We often think we need medication, brain supplements, or memory training to improve the brain. But sometimes, all it needs is to be given back its most natural condition, water at the right time in the right way, and the brain will take care of the rest itself. And once you've felt that softening, you'll never want to go back to that heavy, groggy state you used to feel every afternoon. Mrs. Martha and her story, just one glass of water. I remembered myself again. I met Mrs. Martha on a rainy Tuesday morning in Gainesville, Florida. She came with her daughter, not because of any clear illness, but because lately, she'd been feeling confused at the grocery store, mixing up times, and once couldn't remember where she'd left her glasses all afternoon. "I'm still healthy," she said. But in her eyes, there was a quiet worry, the kind older adults often hide so well. I asked, "Do you drink water before meals?" She smiled, shook her head. "I don't drink much, doctor. I worry about having to go at night." A familiar answer, one I've heard hundreds of times a year. I didn't explain much. I just told her and her daughter, "Let's try something really small, before each meal," said a warm glass of water, 150 milliliters. Drink it 30 minutes before eating. Nothing else needed. She agreed. Not fully convinced, but not resistant either. 3 weeks later, she returned. The moment I walked into the room, I saw her smiling. Not a forced smile, but the smile of someone who just found something deeply familiar again. "You know, doctor," she said, "these past few days I've been reading the morning paper start to finish without skipping a line. I even remembered the name of the mailman the other day, something I've never paid attention to before. But most importantly, I feel like I've become myself again." I paused for a few seconds. Because I knew what she had reclaimed wasn't just memory. It was the feeling of being alive, being connected, being fully present in every moment. And just one glass of water at the right time was enough to awaken that. One small reminder to hold on to an entire life. Mrs. Martha's granddaughter is a 10-year-old girl with blonde hair and brown eyes, named Lily. After her grandma started drinking water regularly before meals, Lily drew a little note and stuck it on the fridge. "Drink your water, Grandma." That was all. A small handwritten note, in crooked little letters, but it reminded more than just one elderly woman to drink water. It held onto a piece of memory, a bit of clarity, and sometimes a connection slowly fading between two generations. I've always believed, care doesn't start at the hospital. It starts at the dining table. With a glass of water. With a gentle glance. With a hand that's already poured it. A glass of water, simple as it may seem when given at the right time, doesn't just soften blood flow or brighten the brain, it warms an entire relationship. I've seen too many families panic when a grandparent suddenly falls. Forgets the grandkids' names. Speaks incoherently after a quiet afternoon. And they say, "If only we had known earlier." So if you still have a chance to remind your loved ones, start reminding them today. One small reminder may not change the whole world, but sometimes it holds on to an entire life. Between you and a clear, alert life is just one glass of water at the right time. Some distances in life seem so far. Like the gap between confusion and clarity. Between fatigue and ease. Between an afternoon spent sitting silently, and one spent chatting, remembering every detail about your grandchild. And then you realize that distance isn't a year of treatment, or an expensive pill. It's just one glass of water at the right time. We often look for big solutions to what feels like a big problem. But the brain, the body's most powerful organ, only needs the smallest things, especially when age makes it more fragile. I've seen eyes grow dull from dehydration, voices slow down from thick blood, and people go through days without truly being present, all because they'd forgotten one small habit. And I've seen eyes light up again after 3 weeks of change. Voices grow quicker. Clarity returns not through a miracle, but through the steady rhythm of one glass of water each meal, each day. So if you're hesitating, if you've forgotten yourself, if you've ever thought, "Well, I'm getting older, it's normal to forget things," then please pause, just for a moment. Place a glass of water before your meal. Drink slowly, gently, and let the blood within you soften, flow more freely, nourish every corner of memory and awareness. You and your brain aren't as far apart as you think. You're not broken. You're not fading. You're just dry. And maybe, starting tomorrow, one simple action could be the bridge between you and a truly alert life. If you have parents, grandparents, or if you are entering an age where memory deserves care, please share this video. Because who knows? One glass of water at the right time today might be the thing that preserves a full memory tomorrow.